One final battle still to be fought in the midterms and the U.S. Senate, this time in Mississippi. Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith is running against Democrat Mike Espy. And normally this should be a slam dunk for Republicans, but the race is suddenly in doubt. To investigate why, elections expert, Independent Women's Voice senior fellow Lisa Boothe. She's been
I like that, elections expert.
Well, you've been doing all the midterms, and it's 3 weeks after Election Day, but the midterms are still on. Why is Mississippi in trouble?
Well, that's my background working in politics over the years. Well, look, it's competitive because there was a jungle primary, and Cindy Hyde-Smith, who is the Republican incumbent there who's running for re-election, nobody reached over the 55% threshold. So now we are in this runoff November 27th. There you see on the screen Mike Espy is the Democrat, a former agricultural secretary, and then Cindy Hyde-Smith, as I mentioned, who's the incumbent, will face off then. Democrats are really drawing attention to some recent comments that Hyde-Smith has made, and so that's what they're kind of honing in and focusing on. However, I don't know if this race will end up being as competitive as people are trying to make it out to be. Remember, there were two Republicans that ate up a lot of that vote. Right. You had Hyde-Smith, who was the leader, not reaching the 50% threshold, but you also had Chris McDaniel eating up over 16% of the vote. So without him in the picture, you can see how her chances are a lot better off on November 27th.
So you don't think there's anything to this theory that a lot of formerly red states are starting to purple a little? That's the Democrats' theory on how Texas, Georgia, and maybe even Mississippi, in the medium term, an election cycle or two down the road, and things favor them.
Well, we'll find out in 2020. I mean, it's really hard to tell. This was just a bad election cycle for Republicans. I mean, I remember in 2009, Time magazine did a cover and said, endangered species for Republicans. And then Republicans went on to win the House, 63 seats they netted in 2010. And then 2012, Republicans did this autopsy report. They're in so much trouble for winning the White House. Go back to win the Senate in 2014 and the White House in 2016. We just don't know. Maybe 2020 is a terrible year for Republicans. We don't know that. So I don't think we can really draw the conclusion that somehow Republicans are in trouble in the South. We'll find out on November 27th what happens in this race, though. Maybe that proves me to be wrong. But I do think with Chris McDaniel no longer being on the ballot there in just a Republican versus Democrat race, Republicans will come home for Hyde-Smith.
OK, well, you'll be back to tell us about that, Lisa, November 27th, Mississippi. Thank you, Lisa. It only took 10 days, but Stacey Abrams has finally admitted she's lost Georgia's gubernatorial race. Despite that, she's not actually conceding, and instead is claiming the election was illegitimate because it happened to produce the wrong winner.
It was not a free and fair election. It was not fair to the thousands who were forced to wait in long lines. It was not fair to the thousands that were put on hold with their registrations.
Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the person who won an adequate number of votes.
But you're not using the word legitimate. Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the legal governor of Georgia.
Fox senior political analyst Brit Hume joins us. Brit, the Democrats seem to be taking the view that this guy is like, Hosni Mubarak or Colonel Gaddafi. He didn't really win the thing.
This is how this works, Mark. If you're a Democrat and you complain, no matter how unfounded your complaint may be, about the results of an election, while you're a patriot, I've seen her styled in some places as a class act when you complain about the result of an election and claim that it was rigged or whatever. If you're a Republican in Florida, however, and you complain about the documented, court-confirmed irregularities in 2 counties down there, why, you're undermining democracy. Now, if that sounds to you like a double standard, I would suggest that that's exactly what it is, and the hypocrisy is remarkable. And don't forget this. Donald Trump wins the election in 2016, and we have heard no end of complaints that was rigged and set up for him in a plot of collaboration with the Russians, and with still people who cling to that theory, that conspiracy theory, to this day.
Right.
So it's okay if you're a Democrat to complain, but if you're a Republican,
Democrats don't actually seem to accept the legitimacy of any Republican victory. In the end, what they're doing is actually undermining the entire faith in the legitimacy of U.S. elections, aren't they?
Well, that is certainly the complaint that they always lodge when Republicans complain. But heaven forfend, you see, that we would ever suggest that that's what they're doing. But I think in the case of the Georgia election in particular, that their complaints are especially unfounded. And if you look at the complaints sort of point by point, you find that the things that were done that took certain people off the voter rolls were mandated by law. Right. If you do the identification, the signature check that they have to do, that is likewise a matter of law. There's nothing irregular about the way that election was handled that has been in any documented in any serious way, and yet here she is complaining to huzzas from her side of the aisle about the legitimacy of the election. It's just and I think it. My view of this is that the complaint is so lame that it probably won't do very much damage to people's faith in democracy, but it's out there anyway.
Well, speaking of faith in democracy, you mentioned that here we are 2 years on. They're still investigating officially the 2016 election. And today the president finished his answers for Robert Mueller. Does that mean that Mr. Mueller's investigation is drawing to a close?
Well, one would think that this would represent a final stage now, and I think that the Mueller team has been waiting to see what kind of answers it could get President Trump to answer for quite some time, and this appears to be it. Now, I suppose it's theoretically possible that they could look at these answers and say, well, wait a minute, this opens up a whole new line of inquiry, and they will insist on doing that. You know, these independent counsels or special prosecutors, when that was still the case, do tend to go on for as long as they want with whatever budget they need. And of course, the clamor in Washington now is the fear that this new acting attorney general will rein that investigation in. My hunch is that the investigation is probably very near a conclusion. And you know, Mark, this investigation has been widely mischaracterized on all sides. You often hear it said that, well, the purpose of the investigation was to determine if there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Actually, that is a subset of what the investigation was supposed to be about. It originated under James Comey as a counterintelligence investigation to determine what exactly the Russians did to try to influence the election. Right. That was its principal purpose, with the collusion allegation being a piece of that, but not the main event. So I think what we're likely to hear from Mueller is a report that will go into quite some detail about exactly what the Russians did, which could be very useful to know.
Yeah, as long as they manage to finish it before the Russians steal the 2020 election. I mean, at a certain point, things just become theoretical.
Or before the 2020 election is over.
Or 2024, yeah. Thank you, Brit.